This morning, the battle over educating Texas kids. First, Republicans defend their school choice bill. Senate Education Committee Chair Brandon Creighton joins us from Austin. Then, House Democrats unveil their own education plan. State Representative Gina Hinojosa, a former Houston ISD trustee, answers questions from her office at the Capitol. The TEA makes its move, taking over Houston ISD, even though the district is improving. State Representative Ron Reynolds represents Southwest Houston and chairs the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. He pushes back this morning. And Texas is among the worst states for workers. So what's behind lawmakers' push to take away break times and other benefits?
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning, everybody. I'm Teresa Woodard in for Jason Whiteley this week. Before we get to our guests, let's tackle some political headlines from across Texas. We're starting down in Austin, where we have a new Secretary of State. The Senate has confirmed former State Senator Jane Nelson. It was a unanimous vote. Nelson is a Republican. She served in the Senate for 30 years before deciding not to run for re-election. She is now Texas's chief elections officer. It is a position that has become highly politicized in recent years after some politicians pushed false and debunked theories about widespread voter fraud. Staying in Austin now, Congressman Chip Roy, who represents that area, has already made an endorsement in the 2024 presidential race, and it is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Roy is the first congressman to formally endorse DeSantis, and DeSantis has not even announced a bid for the office yet. Now, former President Trump does remain the frontrunner, but national polls are showing that DeSantis is right behind him. To Amarillo now, there have been protests at a federal courthouse there as a judge hears arguments over mifepristone. That is the most commonly prescribed pill for medication abortions. It's been available for more than 2 decades. But an anti-abortion coalition based in Tennessee argues the drug is unsafe and that the FDA's approval process was flawed. The case does impact mifepristone prescriptions even in states where abortion is legal. This morning, our conversations center on Texas schools, particularly how to fund them. Our first guest says tax dollars should follow kids whose families choose a private education over a public one. Senator Brandon Creighton is the chair of the Senate Education Committee. He is a Republican from Conroe, and he wrote Senate Bill 8. Senator, welcome back to the show. We appreciate your time this morning. You can call them educational savings accounts. Some people call them vouchers. No matter what, your proposal does take taxpayer money from public schools and give them to private schools. Why do you support that?
Yeah, I always think the reference and nomenclature is interesting, and I appreciate you bringing it up. But the traditional voucher is money distributed straight to the family, right? And for education savings accounts, as it's indicated in our policy, the comptroller's office would take applications for the use of these $8,000 education savings accounts, and that would go directly to an approved private school that the family preferred. Separate from that, we're working hard to lift up public schools and teachers more than ever before, as we have the last several sessions. So as we provide historic funding to public schools, as we provide separate from that new enrollment growth funding, as we provide separate from that pay raises across the board for teachers, and separate from all of that, we have a surplus. It's also being used for educational freedom and alternatives that our Texas students need in certain categories. So it's not in any way coming out of public education funding.
You talked about the $8,000 credit, but from the state of Texas, the state gives about $6,000 to public schools per student. So why is that number so different?
Well, even Raise Your Hand Texas in their data shows that an average of about $10,000 per student travels across the state of Texas for our 6 million public school students. Some show those averages up in the $12,000 and $14,000 range. For the $8,000, we just looked at a number that from a scarcity of dollars standpoint, that we could comfortably justify in this budget to not create any kind of a fiscal cliff. We look at surpluses cautiously because we can't obligate future legislatures or budgets to money that won't be there in the future.
So you're saying 8,000 is something that feels sustainable on down the road.
Absolutely.
Why does your bill treat small districts so much differently than it treats large districts?
Well, as you mentioned, we have a hold harmless in the legislation for any school districts of 20,000 students or smaller. That's not really what most people around the building describe as just small districts, right? 20,000 students or less. But we try to, again, pick a number. We always have to land on certain numbers that are sustainable within the budget. And in this regard, we're doing our best. As rural members often acknowledge that in other states, we haven't really seen a lot of rural students use these ESAs.
A couple of weeks ago, when you were on Inside Texas Politics, you said you were starting to win over some rural Republicans. And so are you seeing more of that because of the way you've sort of carved out that $10,000 credit that you're going to give to some of those smaller districts if students do choose to take part?
It's a great question. No, I'd love to take credit for winning hearts and minds, but really our parents and our families across this state are the ones that are winning hearts and minds and creating the momentum that we're creating for exactly this effort with our parental Bill of Rights, certainly with our teacher Bill of Rights and our entire sort of public school and parental rights and education freedom agenda this session.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay, thank you so much.
There is more of our interview with Senator Creighton on our podcast. It's called Y'all-itics, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. We are going to pause the education discussion now. We'll pick it up again later. But for now, several Texas cities and counties have passed ordinances that protect workers. But state lawmakers are now proposing legislation that would limit what local government can do. So no more labor-related ordinances that go beyond what state law requires. Ayan Mitra is the senior managing editor at the Texas Tribune. And Ayan, when you think of that brutal Texas heat in the summer, city ordinances requiring rest breaks for construction workers, that seems to make sense. So what's behind this push for this legislation?
You know, the proponents of the legislation, and they've got a lot of backing from a lot of business groups, is more about consistency when it comes to regulations. You know, they're saying that there's a need to have, regulations around the state level. That's where it needs to be. So they want a consistent framework. I think for small businesses in particular, they want to have that kind of consistency. Of course, like labor groups say, well, these cities are filling in where, state laws fall short. And so things like required breaks, in Texas summer heats for workers are a necessity. But, on the state level, they're saying they need, like, we need more regulation consistency. And that happens at the state level and shouldn't be at the local.
I know it's hard to talk about property taxes in just a few seconds here, but I do want to ask you, that's such the major push really from the legislature. We are seeing differences between the House proposal and the Senate proposal. Talk about those differences.
Right. Well, it's no secret that, this was going to be a legislative session focused on property tax cuts. And so now the House and the Senate each have their respective plans kind of out. And so they're both obviously, more than $10 billion in property taxes. The Senate is really focusing in on homestead exemptions. And this is all related to particularly to school district property tax cuts. And so with the Senate, they're looking at, their proposal focuses on increasing the homestead exemption for all homeowners, as well as, some added exemptions potentially for seniors. And on the House side, they're also looking at something related to kind of the cap on how much school district entities can tax homeowners. So that's a little bit of a different thing. Ultimately, there's going to be some type of tax cut coming here. Yeah. It's just a matter of kind of the avenue, but that's where the plans are right now.
It'll be important to watch. All right, Ayan, stick around. We'll see you again in just a few minutes. Still to come, as Republicans push their second school choice bill, Democrats unveiled their own education plan. State Representative Gina Hinojosa is next. And the state takes over Houston ISD. State Representative Ron Reynolds responds. He represents Houston. Earlier in the show, we heard Senator Brandon Creighton defend his school choice bill. If it passes the Senate, that plan will face a lot of opposition in the House. Democrats there unveiled their own education plan last week. Before being elected state representative, Gina Hinojosa was president of Austin ISD's Board of Trustees. Now she represents that city in the House. She joined us from her office in the Capitol. Representative, thanks for giving us some of your time this morning. The plan that Republicans are putting forth does give some families in underperforming schools across Texas perhaps more choices than they currently have. So why are you opposed to those plans?
I'm opposed to taking any more money out of our public schools. We already rank third to bottom in this country when it comes to per pupil funding. We are one of only 6 states to deduct funding from schools when students are absent, because we do ADA funding, which is based on attendance as opposed to enrollment-based funding. Our teachers are paid about $8,000 below the national average. And so we're losing teachers all over the state. And the priority needs to be to fully fund our public schools, again, where the vast majority of students go and rely on. And let me make clear what I mean by that is no more taxes, right? This is not about collecting any more in taxes. The property taxes that we all already spend, that most everyone thinks already goes to our public schools, don't actually go entirely to our public schools. The legislature's decided only this much can go to our public schools, and everything that spills over from our property taxes goes first to fully fund charter schools and then to fund the rest of the Republican priorities that are designated in the budget.
I know you've put forth House Bill 31, which would restructure the way that schools are funded. Talk about that. Explain what you're proposing.
So right now we're one of only 6 states to deduct funding when a child is absent. My high school student missed a week of school this semester because of COVID, and it lays bare how this is an archaic form of funding by punishing our schools when we subtract funding for absences. We need to join the rest of the country in fully funding our schools by funding for every child who is enrolled and not subtracting funding for absences.
At a recent hearing, I know you said that TEA is planning to change the way that it grades schools and districts. And then you tweeted that it's almost like there's a plan to make public schools look worse than they are this session. Do you think that's happening?
I think that is part of the plan. That's governor's priority to disparage our schools so that he can pass his private voucher scheme. And it's unfortunate because the last thing we need from our leadership, from our governor, is a tax on our schools.
I want to ask you about House Bill 20. That's the plan to potentially bring home some of the National Guard that's deployed at the border, replace them with what they're calling a border protection unit. This is a priority for the speaker. How hard are you going to fight against this?
I think this is a misguided plan. It's alarming, especially in the environment of conversation within the Republican Party about succession. This feels like a first step towards succession. It undermines our federal authority and sovereignty to defend our borders by our national border patrol and our national security agencies. So it is something I will be watching very carefully. And as a Democratic caucus, we will be fighting back against.
Representative Hinojosa, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Staying on schools, we discussed this last week when it was a possibility. Now it's reality. The state is officially taking over Houston ISD, even though performance in the district has improved since this takeover was first proposed back in 2019. State Representative Ron Reynolds represents Southwest Houston and Missouri City. He is the chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. Representative Reynolds, thanks so much for your time this morning. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me. Good morning. It's great to be here.
So why, in your opinion, is TEA taking over HISD right now?
Well, unfortunately, I believe that this is partisan politics. I believe this is the state's ability to take over a large urban district that is majority Black and brown, majority Democrat ran, and really put in the people that they believe more aligned with the interests that they are seeking this session. They're seeking vouchers. They're seeking to privatize and put more emphasis on charters. They're looking to end diversity, equity, and inclusion. And previously, they've ended in this notion of critical race theory. So this is a power grab. This is unfortunately partisan politics at its worst, and our kids in HISD and our teachers, in my opinion, are going to suffer.
Not all Democrats feel the way you do. I know your House colleague, Representative Harold Dutton, also a Democrat from Houston. He has said HISD failed. He said there should be consequences for not serving kids who are trapped in failing schools. What do you say to him and others who share that opinion?
Well, I respect Representative Dutton. He is a part of my caucus. I'm the chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, and I have the utmost respect for him. I think he's wrong on this issue. HISD has made substantial progress, and that is not my words. That's according to TEA standards. The school that was failing, Wheatley, that's in his district, has come up from an F to a C rating. HISD has an overall B rating. So I think that Representative Dutton is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You don't think that HISD, the 7th largest school district in the country, should be taken over for one failed school? That is unacceptable. And I think it's certainly a slippery slope, and it happens to HISD, it could happen to other districts as well.
Can you do anything legislatively quickly enough to impact this?
Well, the word is quickly enough. The TA commissioner, he told us that he would implement a board of managers. His goal was June 1st. We have pending legislation right now in the House and the Senate that I'm a joint author of, House Bill 3780, and we need to get it through the legislature quickly to Governor Abbott's desk to be effective immediately. Unlikely, unrealistic, but there is a chance.
Is that a real concern of yours?
It is. It is a real concern because HISD, this is because of one school district, one school, not district, one school. Fort Bend ISD also could be next. They have some schools that have been on the list. If they don't make improvement, they could be taken over just as well. This is a slippery slope, and this legislation that allowed TA to take over HISD could take over other schools in the 254 counties in Texas.
Representative Reynolds, we appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
The Roundtable's take on the TEA takeover when we come back. It is time now for Reporters Roundtable, where we put the headlines in perspective each week. Still with us is Ian Mitra from the Texas Tribune. Also joining us, Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and Bernadine Steptoe from WFAA. She's the political producer at WFAA in Dallas. Good to see each of you this morning. We've spent a lot of the show talking about schools in Texas. I want to dive a little deeper into that. So, Ian, when we think about TEA taking over Houston ISD, what does this mean? What are the politics behind this?
Well, it's an interesting question, too, especially when you look at the framework in the background of the legislative debate around kind of the future of public education. And, you know, with Houston ISD, it's such an interesting thing. Obviously, it's very well known kind of the differences that Houston and Harris County have had with a lot of the state government, you know, particularly around voting and things like that. So there's certainly that's in the background here, too. But, you know, Houston, the largest school district in the state, you know, had a B rating in its accountability ratings, and now having the state take over. Obviously, you know, the state has talked about, you know, the aspects of Phyllis Whitley High School as well as other issues related to the board, but it's still kind of an interesting thing because, you know, the school district and its trustees are very much saying that, you know, we've been going in the right direction.
Absolutely. Bud, we heard from Representative Ron Reynolds earlier basically saying this does feel like an attack on Houston ISD because they have improved. He's warning other districts, hey, this could happen to you. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that's definitely the case. You know, Houston has done better, but not well enough to meet the threshold established by the law. Houston used to be one of the leaders in urban education reform. They've just had trouble keeping up. Everybody's had trouble the last couple of years. There used to be business problems in Houston. It seems now more like it's an education problem. But the question is whether TEA can do any better.
Bernadine, that's the burning question. Can TEA make a difference down there?
Well, we'll see. But I think that it definitely looks as if it's political because you have a district that is improving. And I think that anyone who has been watching knows that our statewide elected officials, our state officials, want to make inroads into Harris County. That is one of the largest counties in the state, and it's also a county where the Republicans don't do well. So I think that to raise the issue of politics is relevant here because the school district is doing better.
Yeah.
So why go in now and do it? But also, let me say this as well. Democrats knew it was coming. So why now all of a sudden, when you can't do anything about it, you're calling all these press conferences and trying to do something about something that is a done deal?
And it's been a done deal for a while. It certainly feels that way, at least. Okay, let's switch gears and talk a little bit more about Chip Roy. We discussed this at the beginning of the show as well. Endorsed Ron DeSantis for president, even though DeSantis hasn't even announced that he is running. Ian, does this indicate that because a Texan is endorsing DeSantis, that we're not going to have a Texan running for president?
It's really interesting. As you mentioned, Teresa, like, DeSantis hasn't officially declared for the presidency, but he's still very much, the talk along with former President Trump. In Texas, among the congressional delegation, obviously with Chip Roy's endorsement of DeSantis, you also have 3 other members of Congress of the Texas delegation who have already said they're voting for Trump or supporting Trump. So, the battle lines are being drawn, and it's hard to see, obviously there's still an opportunity for others to join in, but boy, it's all about DeSantis and Trump right now.
It is. All right, Bud, your take?
Well, exactly. It means that Chip Roy is not supporting Trump. It doesn't mean that he's not supporting Greg Abbott or Ted Cruz. It just means, he's always, kept some distance between himself and President Trump. He wasn't one of the people who totally fell in line,
right,
and he's still not falling in line this election.
All right, we're almost out of time. Bernadine, what does it mean?
It just means that it's early, and we'll see later as to what happens. And there is no Democrat who has declared.
Very good. Good take, good take. We appreciate it, you guys. Thanks for joining us, Bernadine, Bud, and Ian, as always. And thank you for watching, everybody. We hope you have a wonderful Sunday and a great week ahead.